The race to space is heating up. SpaceX just made history with the launch of its Resilience spacecraft to the International Space Station, making it the first full-fledged taxi flight for NASA by a private company. Our next guest runs the world's first global ETF to give investors pure play access to the ever-expanding space industry. Andrew Chanin is CEO of Procure AM, which owns the Procure Space ETF. That ticker is UFO. That's easy to remember. Andrew, welcome to the show. Talk to us about what's in this ETF and how you see investing in space changing under a new Biden administration.
Well, first off, thanks for having me. Space is an industry that we're really excited about. There are so many things that are happening, both from a geopolitical front as well as from a technological standpoint, that is really opening up the space industry to new opportunities. And as far as a potential new administration coming in and looking at space with a new set of eyes, we're actually really encouraged. Although the previous administration has really done a lot to push the space industry forward, both from a commercial and military and defense standpoint, space is something that, when we talk to our space expert, isn't something that is bipartisan, it's nonpartisan. And so we believe that space is something that's here to stay and should and will be potentially a priority for any administration in the future.
Andrew, we've got the ticker up right now. First off, we got the one-year chart. UFO, how come UFO wasn't already taken? I mean, when did this ETF start? I can't imagine UFO was even available as a ticker.
Well, so we launched this in 2019, but it's something that we were actually surprised on our own end that it was actually available. So sometimes you luck out and you look at enough tickers that you finally find something good that's available. But we were certainly thrilled to be the first to stake claim to it in the United States.
So what's actually in this? What's in this ETF? Some of the big names. Obviously, I assume Tesla's in there. What else do you got?
So we don't have Tesla because they are far from a pure play space opportunity. Right now, if you actually look at the holdings, you'll see there's a really interesting grouping of communications, industrials, but communications really being one of the largest slices of the portfolio, because communications is one of the largest revenue generating areas for the space industry today. So think satellites, think ground stations, and the various equipment that relies upon satellite signals. So this interview likely wouldn't be happening today without satellites helping in that process. So as technologies like 5G, cloud computing, Internet of Things, and so on start to rely more and more on using satellites to transfer data from point A to point B, it's something that we think could become a very large player of space. But you also have the aerospace and defense names, which can also be a little bit more diversified and not necessarily as pure play space. So the fund does allow up for 20% of the fund to focus on these more diversified names, but requiring at least 80% of the fund to actually focus on pure play names, which are those deriving over 50% of their revenues from space-related businesses and activities.
Actually, we got Dave still with us here. I want to let you jump in, Dave. What are your thoughts on something like this? Because this has to be pretty uncorrelated to the rest of the market. It might be something good for someone's portfolio.
Yeah, so this falls into the category of what I would say is thematic. And what we mean by a thematic ETF is one that isn't specifically in a GICS sector. It's not just aerospace and defense. It's not just communications. It's crossing sectors to extract a theme that isn't particularly well covered by sort of traditional economic measurements. So I love products like this. I think they give you a real opportunity to make a little satellite play, pardon the pun, in your portfolio on something that you may believe in. I do think this is well positioned for a Biden administration, not so much because I expect all of a sudden there to be a $1 trillion space budget, but because I think one of the things that drives these companies is actually international cooperation, right? Space is an international space. We have an international space station, and a lot of the companies that are driving international space development happen to be U.S. companies. I suspect in a Biden administration, we're going to see not just a focus on the R&D and sort of traditional NASA-style space exploration. I think we're going to see a focus on international cooperation around infrastructure. And ultimately, this is the kind of infrastructure, if you will, people can really get behind. Infrastructure doesn't just mean bridges and roads. It also means telecommunications. It also means making sure that our global planet works together in order to grow the global economy. So I think think there are a lot of very interesting names in this that you sort of pick up accidental exposure to other themes, whether that's aerospace, which I think is a really interesting place to be right now, or these sort of more disparate technology names. I think it's worth taking a look at, not just for the theme itself, but for those individual companies.
Andrew, I want to circle back. So like we just talked about right here, the thematics, it relates to a lot of different industries. Where would you suggest to investors, if you're just trying to get a sense, if an investor's like, what is this typically correlated with? How does this price action move on a typical day? Is there a couple of sectors or a couple of securities that this tends to mimic? If they just were trying to get a sense real quickly, what is this going to do for my portfolio? So they would know, hey, if I want exposure to X, this is the way to do it. If I want exposure to Y, maybe this is the way to hedge against that. What would you advise them?
Well, there today are so many different companies in the space industry focusing on different areas of expertise. And one of the things that was really important to us when creating UFO was not just having, in our mind, a great ticker or a great theme, but it was truly providing something that was different. So if we went through all of our research and came out with an index that said it was a space fund, but it ultimately looked and correlated highly to aerospace and defense or communications, it wouldn't have been something that we would have been interested in providing the market with. For us, you need to provide something truly different. And that was what we realized when creating UFO, was that the index that it tracks doesn't necessarily correlate to aerospace and defense. Yes, it does have some exposure, and you can get access to some of these names like Lockheed and Boeing and whatnot. But really, space is its own domain, and so we saw someone say, oh, well, Virgin Galactic is a large holding, and, that might be, something that makes it risky. But really, we're looking at the space industry, and we're saying, how can you make it, less reliant upon individual companies? And by being able to have over 30 publicly traded names from around the world that are doing all different things in the space industry, and getting names that many people don't have in their portfolios already, particularly in the satellite space. Like David said, hopefully this could be, a satellite exposure for people looking to get exposure in the space industry and looking for it to do so in a way that doesn't provide a tremendous amount of individual company risk.
Yeah, one comment I just make is that there's
real quick,
a lot of this exposure is not very large, right? So Northrop Grumman, obviously a huge company. Many of these smaller satellite companies you have no exposure to, even unless you're in the Russell 3000, and way down at the bottom you'll find some of these names. Some of these are small and mid-cap names that just are not household, in every portfolio kinds of names. So thematic funds like this are a great way to sort of re-weight yourself towards innovation.
No, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say, Dave, that there's a lot of names. We put up the graphic. These are not household names, not getting a lot of play on CNBC, so people can get some exposure to some different things that is usually in their portfolio.